Hello, welcome to the Project Prelim 2024. Today let's go to Economy and Development. This is for your mains, this is the GS paper 3, and for your prelims, again it's an important component. For economics, it's very important that you understand the basic concepts clearly, and also you have to follow the current trend. So let's see what are the basic areas you need to cover based on the previous year questions. So around 20 questions one can expect. This includes the basic concepts, certain areas which is given much weightage, and of course related to the current developments. So let's see different questions from different areas. They did ask about Karl Marx and his analysis of dialectical materialism. This is a basic classical economic question. Most of the people associate Marx with this theory, so it's easy. This kind of questions are actually very rare. Then another concept called social capital, which is being studied in subjects like sociology as well. There was a question. Then there was a question about a very basic idea of economics called the labor augmenting technical progress. So this kind of questions are, as I told you, are basically rare. But when we classify different kind of previous year questions, we could see that there are questions on international economic institutions. There was a question on IMF, about the basic structure of IMF. There was a question. There was a question on publishing this World Economic Outlook, which is published by IMF. This kind of international reports and the agencies which publish them is a often repeated question, so one has to pay attention. Then another report, Global Financial Stability Report by IMF here. Then another term which is related to IMF and its members. Then when it comes to the special drawing right, what are all the currencies which are included? That was another question. Then there were provisions of lending by IMF. There was another question. Then we move on to World Bank and the report published by World Bank. The Ease of Doing Business Index, also created by the World Bank here, and the Global Gender Gap Index, which is given by the World Economic Forum. Then another report by World Economic Forum called Global Competitiveness Report. Then about World Trade Organization and related terms here. Then another two organizations and their comparison here. Then there was a question on the multidimensional poverty index and the components. This kind of questions you can expect in your mains as well. There was a question on the global hunger index. A question on another question on global hunger index. Then a question on masala bonds. Another question on WTO and the different kind of boxes related to it. Then International Monetary and Finance Committee. Then a question on the new development bank by BRICS. Another question on the sustainable development goals. A question on global infrastructure facility. Then a question on India and European Union and the trade negotiations. Then again India and WTO, another question. Then Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, ease of doing business index. These things keep coming in the news. So global financial crisis and how it's going to affect India, there was a question. Then after this international institutions, there can be questions on the general nature of economy, planning and growth. There was question on what is a closed economy. There was a question on the calculation of national income. A question on, economic growth, what all things lead to that. There was a question on fiscal stimulus, a question on the 13th Finance Commission. So the latest Finance Commission and its recommendation is one area where you have to pay attention. Then about the 14th Finance Commission, there was a question. Then district rural development agencies, about that there was a question long time before. Then which all organizations are part of the planning process, there was a question. There was a question on what is the functions of the Labour Bureau. There was a question on T-board. There was a question on the 5-year plans. There was a question on the last 5-year plans also. These questions are, I remember these questions from some long time before. So now we don't have the 5-year plans. So you can't, you don't need to expect too many questions from that area. Then the non-plan expenditure and the percentage of that. Then the growth of GDP and the trends. So this question has been repeated actually. Last 5 years and last 10 years, that's how they just changed the question. Then there was a question on tax revenue and GDP. There was a question on the concept of inclusive growth. This could be a possible question for your mains actually. Then poverty lines and how we calculate poverty. Again a very potential mains question, I'd say. Then the monetary policy, there was a question. Then there was a question on the capital budget. There was a question on the 1991 LPG regime and the changes happened. Another question on the after what happened since 1991. A question on the National Sample Survey Organization. A question on Food Corporation of India. The weightage of food in the Consumer Price Index. So all these, Food Corporation of India and Consumer Price Index, they are potential mains questions. So you have to pay attention how they are being calculated. Then minimum support price, there was question. Then what are included in the real sector in economy. Then a major segment of your prelims include the government's welfare schemes. So some very important schemes which been there for quite some time. You could expect questions again from there, and any new schemes which was announced recently has also need to be added to this. So for this it's important that you keep an eye on economic survey and the daily update of the Press Information Bureau, etc. Because the conventional newspapers may not give enough weightage for the new schemes. There were questions on Digital India, question on the public key infrastructure, then question on the Bhim app, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana on skill development, Atal Innovation Mission, then questions on Aadhaar card, and another question on Aadhaar card, related to the security aspect. There were questions on the Smart India Hackathon. All these things keep coming in the current affairs part, and you check any kind of compilation, you will be able to cover all these areas. Then National Pension System. There was a question on the National Water Mission, a question on persons with disabilities and their related programs. There were questions on the MGNREGA and Aam Aadmi Bhima Yojana, which is a very important insurance scheme. There was a question on the accredited social health activists called ASHA workers. So most of the scheme, you just need to understand the beneficiaries and the name of the scheme and the beneficiaries. If you know, most of the time you will be able to answer the questions. Then India's decentralized approach to healthcare. So any welfare scheme which education, health and general insurance and housing kind of schemes, you have to pay particular attention. Then on Janani Suraksha Yojana, Anemia Mukt Bharat, that's again a health related scheme. Then Ajivika, that's the National Rural Livelihood Mission. There was a question when this was introduced. There was a question on the Employees State Insurance Scheme. There were questions on the Consumer Protection Act and the different components of that. The Food Safety and Standards Act, there was a question. Then there was National Food Security Act 2013, there was a question. So whenever there is any kind of amendment happens in this classic acts, you can expect a question. Then Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, and again a question on minimum support price. Then Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, that is a financial inclusion scheme. Then the Niti Aayog replacing the Planning Commission was a question. Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana, there was a question. The Rashtriya Garima Abhiyan, so that was a scheme of eradication of manual scavenging. Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, the crop insurance scheme, there was a question. There were questions on Kisan Credit Card. There were questions on the Stand Up India. There were questions on the Mission Indradhanush, the 7 diseases and the vaccination cover. There were questions on the Swayam program initiation by the, this includes the free online education. Then Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. Then Atal Pension Yojana. National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Then National Skill Qualification Framework. National Career Service. The government give a lot of importance to skill development because of the demographic dividend we have. Vidyanjali Yojana. Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. Then recognition of prior learning and how it is being certified. All these schemes you could see are directly related to education and skill development. National Nutrition Mission, very important. Then Maternity Benefit Amendment Act. Ayushman Bharat. Then about the Call Controllers Organization. National Institute of Urban Affairs. India Sanitation Coalition. Yeah. So you could see the, the different aspects of welfare schemes which been asked, and when most of the case it is about just you need to understand the basic area which is being covered. Then there were questions on population and employment. There were questions on the demographic transition theory. There was a question on the demographic dividend, what exactly does it mean, and the importance on demographic dividend, and how important it is to have skill development to use it fully. Then there were questions on disguised unemployment. There were questions about economic development and its relation to poverty and unemployment. Then there was a question on the human capital formation. Then capital output ratio, there was a question. Then as per the industrial employment amendment rules, there was a question. There were questions about casual workers. Then you can expect a lot of questions from trade and investment. That's another important area in economics. There were questions about production linked incentive scheme. Then about digital currency, there was a question. There was a questions about beta, a question on the current account deficit. There were questions on exports and imports. There were questions on the Brent crude oil. Again, the grade of crude oil, there was another question from last year. Then the quality of imported edible oil, there was a question. Then a question on carbon credits. Question on foreign direct investment and foreign institutional investment. This is a classic question. You could expect a lot more questions from this area. Then another foreign direct investment, and what are the things can be included in that particular one. Another question on FDI. One more question on FDI you could see here. Then about devaluation of currency. Then a question on black money. A question on capital account. Question on price of currency in international market. Question on forex reserves. A question on the exchange rate. A question on balance of payment. So economics, it's important that you understand your concepts very clearly so that you can answer all these questions. Another question on tight monetary policy of US and how it affects. Then about the rating agencies, there was a question. There was a question on indirect transfers, a question on capital expenditure and its example. Then government's borrowing and examples on that. There was this question on foreign exchange reserve. Then a question on the merchandise exports, trade related investment measures. There was a question on deficit finance, a question on deficit budget. Then again about reducing expenditure and how to reduce the budget deficit by that. There was a question on the current account and balance of payment. There was a question on the money supply in an economy. Question on capital gain. There was a question on the convertibility of rupee. A question on convertible bonds. Then there was a question on international liquidity. There was a question on the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. There was a question on external debt. A question on the foreign currency earnings of India's IT sector and remittance, and how it contributes to reducing the risk of a currency crisis. Then there was a question on participatory note. There was a question on foreign on e-commerce firms. A question on India and Sri Lanka trade and its value. There was a question on the purchasing power parity. Yes. So you could see that from this particular area of trade, there has been a lot of questions, and still I would say the maximum questions in economy comes from banking. So MSME Act, then banks and microcredit, then the intercreditor agreement, then there was a question on deposits, a question on commercial paper, a question on public sector bank and its chairman. The chairman of public sector banks are selected by the Banks Board Bureau. That was exactly the question from last year. There was questions on treasury bills, another question on the public sector bank here, a question on capital adequacy ratio. So related to banks, there are a lot of this kind of terms, and you have to have a clear understanding. Then there was a question on the monetary policy, another question on called marginal standing facility rate. Then there was a question on what RBI does in related to the rupee thing. Then another question on RBI and its responsibilities. Then another question on the basic functions of RBI. Then question on RBI again about the regulation of commercial banks. Then government securities and RBI, which is called as open market operation. Question on statutory liquidity ratio. Then RBI and rupee again. Then RBI's recent directives, there was a question. Then again, when RBI does something, what happens? That's kind of questions you often see. When RBI decides to adopt an expansionist monetary policy, what will be the effect of that, or what will be the characters of that? Then the governor of RBI and how the person is being appointed. Then the central bank's function, lead bank scheme, which is practiced in India. Then another question on the Bank Board Bureau. Then another question from the lead bank. Then a question on the money multiplier. Then another practical question from banking. Then a question on the priority sector lending. Then commercial bank and agriculture loan, there was a question. Then the public investment in agriculture, there was a question. A question on regional rural banks. A district central cooperative bank, there was a question again from recent years. A question on microfinance you see here. Then the liquidity of different kinds of sources. There was a question about teaser loans. There was a question on statutory reserve requirements. There was a question on the bank rate. A question on, how increase in bank rate, what does it mean? Then increase in demand of money without increase in supply of money will increase interest rate. So these kind of application questions are often being asked in prelims. Then low interest rate, how it increase investment expenditure. Then business correspondence of banks, about them there was a question. There was a question about the Basel III norms and banking sector. There were questions about payment banks. There were questions about core banking solution. There were questions about marginal cost of funds based lending rate system, how it facilitates different aspects. Then Scheme for Sustainable Structuring of Stressed Asset, another scheme of RBI. Small finance banks, there was one more question. Then sovereign gold bond, there was question. Merchant discount rate, there was question. Interest coverage ratio, another related concept. There was a question on the national financial switch. A question on legal tender money. A question on non-financial debt. Then about the retail investors and how they can invest. Then Indian government bonds, there were another question. Then government can reduce the coupon rates on its borrowing by way of inflation indexed bonds. That was another area. The negotiated dealing system order. Urban cooperative banks, there was a question. Yes. So, a lot of questions on banking. So, make sure that you understand all the terms correctly and pay adequate attention to RBI as well as other types of banks. Then there were questions from industrial and manufacturing sector in this. About the 8 core industries of India, there were questions. About coal sector, there was a question. Then along with 8 core industries, electricity generation is given the highest weightage. So thermal power consumes maximum water. They are given some other options as well. Then about consumer price index, about manufacturing sector, there was question. About the mega food parks, there was a question. There was a question on National Innovation Foundation, a question on the venture capital, question on disinvestment. There were question on National Payment Corporation. Then at the Unified Payment Interface, there was a question. Then the Standard Mark of Bureau of Indian Standard, about that there was a question. Quality Council of India, there was a question. Then the Benami Property Transaction Act, there was a question. Then Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board was asked. Then Mines and Minerals Act, there was a question on different provisions of that. This was of course quite on the tougher side. Then another favorite area of UPSC prelim is inflation. So you should have a clear idea about different types of inflation and its causes and effects. So economic growth and inflation, how it happens. Increase in demand and money supply and decrease in aggregate level of output result in rise of prices. So creating new money to finance a budget deficit can cause in high inflation. So inflation benefit debtors if the wages also increase along with it. So decrease in money supply lessens inflation. So there was a question on food inflation particularly. There was another question on base effect which is very related to this. Then the price of rice and how it is being affected. Then there were question of demand pull inflation. There were question of recession, how things happens. There were question on the market demand of a good. Yeah. Then we move on to taxes. Then if a commodity is provided free to the public, what happens? That was a question. We often talk about freebies, especially during the election times. Then there was a question on sale tax. There was a question on value added tax. There was a question on tax and GDP. There was a question on the goods and service tax. Then a question on the tax on online advertisement. There was any dividend or interest income from an infrastructure investment trust. Investment is taxed at the individual income tax slab rate. A specific question on that. Then many central banks worldwide, how they carry out their interest rate. And there was a question on carbon market. there was a question on open market operation again. Then there was a question on capital market here. Then there was a question on intangible assets. These are all from the recent years. Then a question on the 15th Finance Commission. Then about marginal farmers, the small farmer, larger field, there was a question. Then about the UN OPS, sustainable investment in infrastructure and innovation. So the last few questions are from the last year itself, and you could see that it all covers the different aspects we already seen. So for economics, you should know your concepts well. For that, any basic books will do, but it's important that you check the current aspects as well. And of course, it's very, very important that you cover all the previous year questions so that you get the pattern. So conceptual clarity and coupled with the current happenings will get you through economics. For many people, economics is slightly tougher, I know. So you have to pay adequate attention and don't leave it out. In actual exam, once you revise it properly, you still will get some easy questions as well. So thank you for watching.